Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Dojo Live. Today is Tuesday, March 29th, 2022. This is Tulio Sergusa broadcasting from Southern California. And joining me today is Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico. Hi, Kim. Welcome back.
Hey, Tulio. Thank you.
And, of course, our guest, I don't know what's going on with the camera today. Okay, here we go. Belsasar Lepe, who's the CEO at Cerby. It's good to have you with us. Is joining us from Northern California. We got North and South representing today, California.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to talk about something interesting today, and we're going to have a little retro back to the year 2000 and look at what's happened in 20 years. As it relates to building a company. But before we go into the topic and kick off the question that we're looking to answer today, let's get to know our guest a little bit first. Bel, which is short for Belsasar, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Welcome to the show again.
Absolutely. Tulio, Kim, thank you again so much for having me. Really appreciate it. A little bit about myself. As was mentioned, I am CEO and co-founder of Cerby. We're a cybersecurity company focused on automation. My background originally, way back when, 15 years ago, started out as an engineer at Google. Actually, a couple years into my time there, went and founded my first company, Uyala, which was a company in the online video platform space. We grew that company out, sold it. As part of that process, learned a lot about building a company. So that's where the kind of the 2000s part comes from. We were fortunate to be able to sell that company to a large Australian telco by the name of Telstra. And then a couple of years ago, I founded my second company, Cerby, which is the one that we're building out now. But throughout this entire frame, building a company has been a passion of mine, and finding ways to leverage talent in new places has been a really big part of how we've gone about it. And Mexico actually has been one of those locations that we've leveraged to have success.
All right. Tell us a little bit about Cerby. What was that aha moment that gave birth to it, and what is it that you guys do today?
So the motivation for Cerby actually came from one of our former customers at Uyala, which was my previous company, and my co-founder's previous company, Wiseline. We were working with the security department at that company, and they came to us and said, hey, there's what is called shadow IT. Shadow IT, if it's a term you're not familiar with, it refers to applications that end users install without telling IT teams. And so what this individual at the company had mentioned was there are way more applications that are being used outside of IT than inside of IT. These are the applications that are getting hacked. There needs to be a new solution that encourages users to register these applications versus using them in the shadows, because these applications are responsible for 1 out of every 3 cybersecurity attacks at an average cost of $4.23 million per breach. And so understanding that, we went and did a little bit of research, and it turned out he was right. End users, especially now on the other side of the pandemic, hopefully we're on the other side of the pandemic, there's a predisposition towards using applications that they want to use. It's a little bit like one of our advisors put it this way. Imagine that you were hiring a contractor to build a house, and then you told the contractor that they could only use these 5 tools to build the house for you. That's exactly what's traditionally been happening in the enterprise. And so there's now this preference by the standard business user employee to be able to use their own app. So that's the space we play in, and we help ensure that motion is far more secure.
Interesting. Well, I would guess also in the past 20 years, having the ability to download a bunch of apps on your phone has changed behaviors as well. I mean, I recall 20 years ago, enterprise software, you didn't really have much of an option to download stuff. It wasn't possible. Everything was on-prem, right? So with the cloud and mobile computing, people are used to having their own things, their own way. So interesting. Let's see what we can learn today. The topic is an interesting one. And I can sense that it's going to be a personal experience that we're going to learn from. So I'm looking forward to that. if Kim could please introduce the title and the question we're going to answer, that would be awesome. We look forward to talking and learning some more.
I sure can. Thank you for joining us today, Belle. Thank you for joining me, as always, Tulio. Today's topic, as chosen by Belle, is building a company in the 2020s versus the 2000s. And the question we're looking to answer is how it's become easier and what's become harder about building a company, and specifically for a LatinX founder versus today versus, let's say, 15, 20 years ago. So, Belle, my question for you as we kick off today, you already mentioned this a little bit in your personal story, how you started your own adventure as an entrepreneur around 2000. You're continuing that today into 2022. But why was 2000s the date that you chose to contrast versus, today versus further back or even a bit closer?
It's, well, I have the experience from then, so that kind of helps for the story. But 2008, so it's the late 2000s specifically that I'm going to be referencing there. It was at the beginning of the kind of economic growth period that we saw that lately you can say is kind of entered its kind of reset period. And so from 2008 to now, you've been seeing economic expansion. And so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of look at what did it look like before the economic expansion period and what does it look like now. So those are kind of the bookending reasons why.
Perfect. And clearly a Latinx founder reference to yourself. But is this something that you chose because are there fewer Latin people in technology in general? Is this an upcoming market where you're seeing tons of growth? Aside from your personal story, why do you think that this is applicable today?
It's so if you look at Latinx owned businesses, especially across the US, they tend to make up a low 20% of overall number of businesses that exist. But today, they only get 2% of the funding. So there's a very significant disconnect between the total number of Latinx owned businesses and how much investment they're getting. Let me give you another statistic. Between 2007 and 2017, so roughly the time frame that we're talking about, 50% of newly created businesses in the US were created by Latinx founders. But in that same time frame, they only received 1% of all investment.
Wow. Just to make sure we heard you correctly, that's 50, not 15?
50 of all businesses created from 2007 to 2017 were founded by Latinx founders. But they're receiving a disproportionately small amount of the overall investment. And so this is something that, myself, my brother, who was my co-founder at Uyala, this is something that we've always been looking at because we think it's a significant economic opportunity that is not being taken advantage of by underfunding this group.
So let me see if we got this right. The majority of the middle class is spurred on basically by Latinx founders. Let's call it what it is. I mean, the half of the small businesses or businesses that are created, which fuel really the economy, the middle class economy. But yeah, only 1% are getting funded. Well, why is that? What's that about? Is it predominantly businesses that are not in tech? Is it not having access? And is that improving over the past 20 years? I'd love to learn a little bit more of what you have discovered as to the reason for that and what can be done to change that.
It's a big topic, and I don't know that we can necessarily get to all of the underlying reasons for it. This is a constant topic of conversation in the tech side, so I'll speak more to that. Can't necessarily speak to all manner of Latinx businesses, but one of the main reasons why it is mentioned that this occurs is the folks that are the decision makers. They don't necessarily look like the people that they're funding. And I don't mean that just physically, but backgrounds, what they come from. So, a more recent statistic from 2017 to 2021, overall amount of funding that went to Latinx businesses was 1.7 billion in 2017 to 6.8 billion in 2021. So that was 2% of all funding for tech companies went to Latinx founders. Now, the interesting side point is 2% of all decision makers during that time frame were Latinx. And so one of the things that you can say is a reason why this occurs is the amount of funding mirrors the percentage of decision makers. And so if you wanted to impact this, you potentially need to look at broadening the decision-making group.
Okay, so more exits Latinx have, more general partners, VCs they create, more investment opportunities, basically.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad that it's set up that way, but at least we're making progress, right? So let's talk about, you said something interesting here. Has it become easier or harder to build a company in the past 20 years? It sounds as though it's becoming easier, but not monumentally easier. So what's that journey been like? This is your second company. What's that journey been like for you? And what are some of the unique nuances that you want people to be aware of Latinx founders and Latinx companies that are really doing amazing things? I mean, we're a company that was founded by Latinx founders, right? So we get it, but tell us a little bit more in your opinion. How can we make this easier, and what are the challenges, and what are the opportunities? Are there opportunities that people are missing out on, and why?
You know, I maybe starting even from a general standpoint, it's definitely become easier to build a company nowadays. In 2008, when we were going out and raising our first round of funding for Uyala, this was just at the beginning of AWS, more or less, becoming a option. And one of the things that worked to our benefit is we didn't need to go rack and stack hardware. We were able to get instances, hardware from AWS. So our ability to stand something up, it was faster. Now, you flash forward 14 years later, the idea of creating a company without AWS is just, it's absurd, right? You can't imagine not having that option. And additionally, you also have Azure AD and Google. So that has become easier. Your ability to test out an idea, get new infrastructure up and running very quickly, that's something that's become a lot easier. Something else that's become a lot easier is you don't have to be in Silicon Valley to found a company anymore. At the 2008, 2009, if you were a founder and you went to Sand Hill Road, or at the time there were increasingly more VCs in San Francisco, and you said, oh, hey, actually our team's based in Denver, our team's based in New Mexico or New York, or worse, you said Mexico City or Guadalajara, Mexico. I mean, they wouldn't tell you right then and there that they weren't going to fund you, but chances are that you probably weren't going to get an investment, because at the end of the day, the folks that are decision makers on the other side of the table, they also have to go out and raise money, right? They also have folks that they answer to, and they need to return an investment on whatever investment they got from their LPs, the limited partners. And so they tend to stick to a pattern, right? If they've seen founders with a particular background have success, you tend to stick within or stay within that kind of model. Because we're all creatures of habit. We look at pattern recognition, pattern matching, and we tend to go with what's worked before. But the nice thing now, kind of going a little bit more to the Latinx side of things, there are more reference points for successful companies. You look at Brex, you look at Rappi. Those are two companies that have, at least in part, a Latinx founder, and these are unicorns, or companies that are on their way to being unicorns. And so it helps to have those reference examples of Latinx founded companies that have had success, because that then starts to fall into the pattern matching process, and investors can reference that and say, all right, this has been successful. This is maybe only slightly different from that. Let's try it. There's more reason to believe that it can be successful here as well.
Interesting. I can personally attest to this challenge in 1999, trying to raise funding for what was at the time up and coming small IT services company by the name of Softtech in Mexico. Couldn't raise any money here in the U.S., but through a partnership with Ernst & Young, we were able to accelerate. And now they're the largest IT services company in Latin America. So, you know, it's a testament of what it takes not to give up and what happens when you don't do that. But it was not easy. It was very challenging and very difficult. Many of us ended up going without pay for many, many months as a result of making that happen. But let's talk a little bit about, so it's good to hear that that's changing. That's very good to hear that that's changing. And the, you know, rightfully so. There's great ideas from all over the world, and there's opportunities to invest in them. Let's talk a little bit about your company, Cerby. You said something interesting about shadow IT. Everybody's downloading apps, but not registering them. So it gets a little out of control. And if you're a smaller company, it's one thing, but if you're a large enterprise, that could be very challenging. So what is it that you guys do to get that under control or help manage that? Can you help us get an understanding of what that looks like?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, one of the key background elements to keep in mind is over the last 2 years, we've seen a drastic evolution of how people work, right? 30 months ago would have been unthinkable that you'd have, you know, half of your workforce working consistently, you know, from home Mondays and Fridays. And the reason why that matters is there's now a lot of corporate activity that's happening off network. And by off network, I mean folks are accessing corporate data, carrying out corporate tasks on personal devices, personal networks, and sometimes sharing access on those personal devices to, you know, non-corporate employees. And so the reason why that is important is a lot of security products previous to the start of the pandemic, a key assumption was you were able to see all corporate traffic, right? You could look at the VPN and you knew what people were accessing. But now in a world where anywhere between 40% to 70% of all corporate activity is happening off network, how can you know what users are doing, right? There's more shadow than ever before. And so that situation is one of the things that motivates Cerby's approach to the problem, which is very user driven. What we've realized is in this new working environment, users are the gatekeepers, you know, the employees, the business users, and they're not going to give you visibility into the applications that they're using unless you give them a reason to or give them incentive to. And so our system is incentives based. We have found the things that users tend to do the most with the applications that they introduce, and we've actually made it easier for them to carry out those tasks on our platform. As a consequence of that, they actually lean in and self-register the applications with us. And so it's a very different way of detecting apps. Historically, when it came to detecting shadow IT, it was very command and control oriented. We instead take a brokering and discovery oriented approach where the user has reason to want to lean in and leverage our platform to administrate their applications. Once they've done so, we can then secure those applications. And let me give you a kind of specific anecdote. So working with a customer, at the start of our engagement, they thought that they had one Slack tenant, right? So across their 5,000 plus employees, they thought they only had one Slack tenant. After we'd been deployed for a couple of months, we determined that there were 72 Slack tenants, 72. And that's what happens, right? When you give users choice, they introduce these applications, but using our user-driven approach, we were able to find all of those rogue Slack tenants.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm also curious about some insight between applications that are for work and then applications that are for personal use. Let's say, I don't know, HBO Max or something, right? So how are you gearing toward, you know, strictly sort of like professional-based applications, or is this encouraging people to register every application? And how do you see companies responding to that mix of professional with personal, you know, personal time, work time, and this strange kind of, you know, integration that we've had over these past 2 years?
Great question. We tend to, we focus today primarily on the enterprise use case, but we have had a number of folks that we've met with who are like, oh, wow, this would be great for personal use. So we tend to primarily look at the enterprise applications. So we keep an index of which applications tend to be used most frequently in the enterprise setting. But something interesting has been happening, which is as more millennials, well, millennials now dominate the workforce, but as more Gen Z folks enter the workforce, there is a consumerization of enterprise apps, or an enterprisation of consumer apps, where the line of delineation is no longer super clear, right? One of our customers mentioned that they were onboarding someone onto their broadcast editing team, and they were going to set them up with Adobe and all of the software that you would traditionally use for heavy kind of broadcast graphics editing. And they came back and said, "Oh, why are we doing this? I use YouTube, I use TikTok. That's how I edit my content." And so their notion of the applications to use in the enterprise is also changing, and so that definitely makes the job a little bit harder.
For sure, for sure. And I think it's interesting that you made this distinguishing between the command and control and the more sort of self-managed, trust-based enterprises. Let's talk about that a little bit. How have you seen that shift in the last 20 years?
It's a concept that is now far more acceptable, I would say, because it's mirrored in some cases the changing role of the CIO, where before the CIO was, they just had too much work. They weren't allowed an opportunity to be strategic. And I would say increasingly in more and more cases, the CIO and the CISO organizations they're strategic. They're absolutely important to the business. If they weren't before, they're directly reporting into the CEO. And so that change has mirrored an opportunity for what we're seeing with Cerby, where if the role of the IT organization, if the role of the security organization is to be more strategic, you need to automate away at a lot of the tasks that their teams were previously responsible for. And so that's definitely been a key change over the last 14 plus years, that there's an openness to giving users autonomy or agency over their applications, because the underlying technology around automation actually allows that to happen. You can rely on an automation system to do things like rotating passwords, removing access, and that in turn frees up employees and IT folks to worry about stuff that matters.
Sure, I like this automation component, and I think it's interesting to me because one might be tempted to think that having sort of a command and control approach is going to, encourage your employees and your people to register applications that they're using out of fear. But I actually would tend to think that it's that fear that would keep people from registering. Like, dang it, this is really useful for me. And if they know, maybe they're going to make me uninstall or whatever. Versus the trust of my company trusts me, they allow for me to have this type of autonomy, and I'm willing to be transparent back. So do you think that initial, this idea of yes, you have to register versus please register, is the please register actually strong enough? How are you seeing, I know you mentioned rewarding users. What else are you doing to kind of see and encourage that things get out of the shadow?
So the numbers definitely support that this approach works. So we ran another case study with a customer in kind of more the healthcare space, and we did a before and after. So we did a situation where we were able to monitor traffic, and we basically put policies out there and say, hey, you're not allowed to use Box or Dropbox because your file sharing mechanism is SharePoint. So we put these policies out into the organization, and we saw a 14% adherence to the policies in terms of applications you could use, how you could share access. 14%, very, very low. We then went the route of nudging, where when a user was about to do something that they was technically not in line with the policies, we instead told them, hey, we realize you're going to do this. It's against policy. If you're going to do this, this is the way to do it. We saw an 85% adherence to policies when you took the nudging approach. So turns out if you treat employees like they're adults and give them the opportunity to make these decisions, but also most importantly, you give them the context, you do actually see a stronger overall security posture. And that's really critical now, especially as the Biden administration announced at the beginning of last week. There's going to be way more threat actors that are trying to attack businesses. One needs to be thinking very differently about how you protect your company, your employees, your corporate data, and an approach like this drastically improves coverage.
Yeah, 14 versus 85%. That is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what's different, would you say, Bel, between this experience, this company you're building, and the last one? Any lessons you learned from the last one that you applied here, and what would you share those to be?
The several dimensions. I think probably the biggest is we founded this company right at the beginning of the pandemic, Cerby, whereas the previous company, we founded it 2008, right before the Great Recession, which was not so great, but we did found it right before that occurred. So first things first, we didn't have to deal with an economic recession on the level of what we saw in 2008. Immediately going into 2008, we had to reduce the size of our team, and it really forced us to focus, which is good. But that was a significant amount of hardship. So that's something that's very different from the first experience to now. Something else is, hey, remote working can actually be very effective. We were forced to try it, and what we found is, for the most part, you are able to have a team that's very, very productive working remotely. There's some things that still don't work really well remote. So for example, if we're doing something new where you have to really generate shared context, that happens a lot faster in person. It takes a week or two to do that virtually, whereas you can do that in a day if you're doing it in person. So that's something that's very clearly different. And then maybe the last thing I'd mention, kind of at the LatinX level, I remember when we were going out for funding in 2009, shortly after we had opened our first office in Guadalajara, we got a lot of blank stares when we told folks that we were opening up an engineering office in Guadalajara, Mexico. But now you flash forward 13, 14 years, and it's a lot more accepted. The talent pool that exists in Mexico is far better understood, and it's not something that you need to position. It's just like, all right, yeah, you're a company that's looking to grow fast. It makes sense to leverage the talent pool down there.
For sure. I'm so glad that you brought up the LatinX component just this one last time as we're coming to the final minutes of today's show, because I was going to ask you, you mentioned you've spoken heavily to Mexico, but Latinx community in general. What would you say to the investors out there, people who might be listening, a lot of tech companies? Why Latinx? What are these sort of value propositions? What can this bring to your company that maybe you were not going to find elsewhere?
In terms of leveraging the Latinx component, or?
Yeah, or just people, culture, all about it. Why is this the place to go?
First and foremost, the talent pool across Latin America, not just in Mexico, is tremendous. In the Guadalajara region by itself, I believe they graduate something like 10,000 engineering degrees a year. So there's a significant talent pool. It's now far more acceptable to go and join a startup than it was 10 years ago. So you're going to find folks that want to participate. They want to contribute. There's an anecdote that was shared with me where one of our early hires at Uyala, when they were trying to make the decision to join us in 2009, he actually came back and said, I talked to my mom and dad about joining, and I'm going to go work at a bank. They don't think that joining a startup is all that stable. That doesn't happen all that much. And so you're going to, you see folks that are far more willing and to jump in and work hard. And then to kind of emphasize that point, we've seen the average tenure of folks from Latin America be a lot longer. So the average tenure of an engineer in Latin America is 4 to 5 years, whereas up here in the U.S. it's 1.2, 1.7 years. And so that's great. I mean, that's what you get with the talent pool in Latin America. It's a far more engaged, at times, workforce with a longer tenure.
Thank you.
Well, Bel, it's been great to have you. We're up on time. We've learned a lot. There's a lot of opportunities still untapped. And for investors, there's opportunity to increase your consideration for LatinX companies doing extraordinarily well, extraordinary things, but not getting the fair share of investment dollars. So let's change that. There's no reason to not change that. So it's been great to have you with us. And we also admire the culture that you're creating. It's true. When we treat people like adults with dignity, it's amazing what they can do and how much they own what they want to do. So it's good to hear that that's happening. We encourage more companies to do that. So stay with us as we go off there in just a second. Kim, what do we got coming up for the rest of the week?
Yeah, thank you. It is quite a busy week. Tomorrow we have a 12 o'clock show that's going to be with Adam Gordon, who is an instructor at IT Pro T, preparing for today's security landscape. So, you know, a serendipity, coincidentally, we usually always have these shows kind of booked in line. It just happens that way. And then on Thursday, we're actually going to be having two shows. There's going to be the 10 o'clock Design Thinking with Tulio. He'll be speaking with Carrie Brees, CEO and co-founder at Now RX.
That's not this Thursday, Kim. Sorry.
March 31st. Yes, it is.
No, it's April. We don't have a Design Thinking show this Thursday. It's
I'm
April.
sorry.
It was
Then we need to get that. We need to get our landing page updated. I apologize for that one. No Design Thinking show on Thursday, but we do have a show on Thursday afternoon, and that is going to be with Toby Knitzer at Accurate. So join us today, Wednesday and Thursday, 12 o'clock Pacific, right here on Dojo Live. Thank you.
Thank you all. See you back tomorrow.